If you think ignoring a woman makes her chase you, think again, because what she does next will expose everything you never knew about her true intentions. Ignoring a woman creates a mirror that reveals her true emotional maturity, not because silence is inherently powerful, but because it disrupts the emotional rhythm she's used to operating within. When a woman is receiving consistent attention, she stays in a comfort zone, whether that comfort is healthy or unhealthy. But the moment you pull back, intentionally or simply to protect your peace, that comfort zone is challenged. And in that challenge, her true self appears. Her patterns, her triggers, her emotional intelligence, and even her hidden insecurities all rise to the surface. Ignoring her removes the noise, the routine, and the predictable responses that usually mask deeper traits. What's left is the raw, unfiltered version of how she actually handles emotional discomfort. This is why silence becomes a mirror. It reflects how she responds to uncertainty and emotional imbalance. Some women cannot handle even the slightest shift in attention without panicking or overreacting. Their reactions reveal emotional immaturity, an inability to regulate their feelings without external reassurance. They may suddenly become anxious, clingy, or overly dramatic, not because they deeply care about the relationship, but because they fear losing the emotional stability they derived from your attention. Your silence disrupts their sense of control. And instead of responding with patience or curiosity, they respond with impulsive behaviors that expose their inner instability. On the other hand, some women will interpret the silence as a challenge to their ego rather than a signal for introspection. Their emotional immaturity shows up as anger, entitlement, or passive-aggressive behavior. They may lash out, send sarcastic messages, or try to provoke you just to regain your attention. In reality, these reactions are not signs of strength. They are signs of emotional volatility. The mirror of silence shows that they depend on external validation to feel secure, and any disruption to that validation triggers a defensive or hostile reaction. This kind of behavior reveals a woman who has not developed emotional resilience or the self-awareness needed to navigate relational challenges with stability. But the mirror also reveals something else, something extremely valuable. A mature woman responds to being ignored with emotional grounding and self-reflection. She doesn't rush to assumptions, she doesn't spiral into insecurity, and she doesn't begin a cycle of manipulation. Instead, she assesses the situation calmly. She respects your space because she respects herself. She understands that relationships have rhythms and that not every moment of silence is a threat. Her emotional maturity shows in her ability to remain composed, communicate clearly when needed, and maintain her sense of identity independent of your attention. This kind of woman sees silence not as abandonment, but as information. She doesn't panic or retaliate. She observes and reflects. She may ask one respectful question to understand the shift, but if she senses you need space, she grants it without losing her emotional balance. This reaction reflects high emotional intelligence, self-worth, and a stable inner world. In the mirror of your silence, her strength becomes visible. Her patience, boundaries, confidence, and emotional independence all rise to the surface, revealing a woman who values connection but is not enslaved by it. Panic reactions often come from losing control, not losing love. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships, especially when distance or silence enters the picture. Many people assume that when a woman reacts intensely to being ignored, it must mean she deeply cares. But emotional intensity is not the same as emotional depth. What looks like fear of losing you may actually be fear of losing the grip she felt she had on the situation. When someone relies on constant attention or consistency to feel secure, any disruption threatens their sense of control. That threat triggers panic, not because the bond is strong, but because the foundation is unstable. The emotional rush you see is often a desperate attempt to restore the balance she was comfortable with, rather than a heartfelt response rooted in genuine love or emotional connection. This panic usually emerges in women who have built their emotional security around predictability. They become accustomed to the reassurance that attention gives them. Attention becomes a form of control, not always in a manipulative sense, but in a "this keeps me emotionally stable" sense. When the attention suddenly disappears, the mind begins to spiral. Thoughts like, "Why isn't he responding?" or "Did I lose him?" quickly shift into, "How do I get things back to normal?" The urgency she displays is often linked to regaining the emotional environment that made her feel safe. It's not the person she fears losing, it's the emotional certainty. This distinction is subtle, but it is crucial. The panic is not about the relationship ending. It's about losing the emotional leverage that made her feel secure and in control. Another layer to this panic comes from the psychological discomfort of unpredictability. When attention is consistent, the mind relaxes. There is a clear expectation of how things will go, but silence introduces unpredictability, and unpredictability forces the brain into survival mode. A woman with low emotional resilience or unhealed insecurities interprets unpredictability as danger. Her mind doesn't process your silence as "he needs space." Instead, it processes it as "something is wrong and I must fix it immediately." This is why panic reactions often look exaggerated, irrational, or intense. They are not calculated responses. They are emotional explosions triggered by a sudden loss of control over the emotional landscape she relied on. Some women will try to regain control through constant messaging, asking repeated questions, sending emotional paragraphs, or even creating drama to provoke a reaction. These responses are not about reconnecting. They are attempts to force a return to predictability. Others may shift to guilt tripping or emotional pressure. They might say things that make you feel responsible for their emotional discomfort. Again, these are not reflections of love. They are the mind's attempt to restore emotional equilibrium and re-establish control over how the relationship feels. The fear being triggered is internal, not relational. Understanding this allows you to see the situation more clearly. Panic is an instinctive response to loss of control, not always an expression of love. It exposes the emotional landscape she is operating from, revealing whether her connection to you is grounded in genuine affection or rooted in her need to feel emotionally secure through your constant presence and predictable behavior. Sudden sweetness may be manipulation, not genuine affection. This is one of the most confusing emotional shifts you can experience from a woman, especially after you pull back, create distance, or stop giving the same level of attention she's been used to receiving. At first, the sweetness feels flattering. It feels like she suddenly cares more, like she's realizing your value, or like she's becoming the version of herself you always wished she would be. But emotional behavior that changes overnight is rarely rooted in genuine growth. True affection grows slowly, consistently, and thoughtfully. Manipulative sweetness appears quickly, intensely, and conveniently. The moment she senses she might be losing her emotional grip on you. It is not nurtured from the heart, it is triggered by fear, insecurity, or loss of control. This sudden shift often shows up in women who have relied heavily on emotional influence to maintain connection. When you ignore her, step back, or refuse to feed into the usual dynamic, she feels that influence slipping away. And instead of responding with introspection or maturity, she switches tactics. She becomes overly affectionate, overly kind, overly complimentary, or overly available. The goal is not to build emotional closeness, but to re-establish the dynamic that made her feel in control. Sweetness becomes a strategy, a way to pull you back into the familiar pattern where she feels secure. When affection becomes a tool rather than an expression, it loses its authenticity, even if the words sound beautiful and the gestures feel comforting. You can often recognize manipulative sweetness by its timing. It doesn't appear during calm moments or mutual connection. It appears exactly when you start distancing yourself or focusing inward. The change is too sudden, too intense, and too perfectly aligned with her fear of losing access to your emotional energy. It comes with an unspoken expectation. If she becomes extra sweet, you should respond with renewed attention. The sweetness is transactional, not emotional. It's designed to provoke a specific reaction from you. It's not about how she feels. It's about what she wants you to feel. Another sign is inconsistency. The sweetness appears in moments of threat, but disappears the moment she feels secure again. When she has your attention back, her behavior slowly returns to its original pattern. The warmth fades, the affection cools, and the emotional reciprocity vanishes. That's because manipulative sweetness is not sustainable. It requires effort she only invests when she fears losing something. Genuine affection is consistent. Manipulative affection is conditional. Once the condition is met, your return, the behavior shifts again, revealing its temporary nature. There are also women who use sudden sweetness as a means to avoid accountability. If she senses that your silence might be linked to something she did, rather than address the issue directly, she covers it with affection. Instead of apologizing, she becomes extra caring. Instead of reflecting, she becomes extra attentive. The sweetness becomes a distraction, a smokescreen, an emotional shortcut meant to bypass honest communication and emotional responsibility. But affection that is used to avoid accountability is not affection. It's emotional smoothing, an attempt to reset the dynamic without doing the inner work required to earn genuine connection. Anger often hides insecurity and emotional instability. When a woman reacts with sudden irritation, sharp words, or emotional outbursts after being ignored, or when the dynamic shifts even slightly, it may look like strength, confidence, or justified frustration on the surface. But anger is rarely the first emotion. It is a shield, a mask, a defensive reaction designed to cover something far more vulnerable underneath. In many cases, the real emotion she's experiencing is fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear of losing control, or fear that the relationship is slipping out of her hands. Instead of expressing that fear openly, it gets converted into anger because anger feels safer. It gives her a sense of power when internally she feels powerless. It gives her a sense of control when internally she feels threatened. It allows her to project outward rather than look inward at the insecurities she doesn't want to confront. When a woman hasn't developed emotional regulation or hasn't healed from past wounds, anger becomes her default response to discomfort. If she interprets your silence as rejection, disrespect, or a sign that she no longer holds the same place in your life, her reaction may come out as hostility rather than vulnerability. She may send confrontational messages, accuse you of things you didn't do, or create dramatic scenarios just to reclaim her emotional position. This anger isn't about what you did, it's about what she fears. The intensity of the reaction often reflects the depth of her insecurity. For someone who carries emotional instability, even a small shift in your behavior can feel like a threat to her emotional survival. The anger becomes a way to regain emotional footing. even if it damages communication and connection in the process. Sometimes anger emerges because she doesn't feel equipped to process her emotions in a healthy way. Instead of pausing, reflecting, or asking direct and honest questions, the emotional discomfort overwhelms her. She may not know how to sit with her own thoughts without spiraling. She may not know how to express vulnerability without feeling exposed or weak. So she chooses the emotion that feels strong, even if it's destructive. This becomes especially evident in women who rely on external validation to stabilize their sense of self. When the validation disappears, even temporarily, the emotional foundation underneath becomes shaky. That instability expresses itself as anger because anger distracts her from the deeper issue. She does not feel secure within herself. This kind of anger can also be rooted in unhealed emotional patterns from past relationships or childhood trauma. If she grew up in an environment where affection was inconsistent, where love had to be fought for, or where emotional needs were dismissed, silence or distance can trigger old wounds. The anger she displays toward you is sometimes a reaction to unresolved pain that has nothing to do with you. But because you are the one present, you become the target. Her mind interprets your silence as a repeat of past abandonment, and her emotional instability amplifies the response. The anger becomes a coping mechanism, a way to avoid confronting the real pain beneath the surface. In the end, anger becomes a signal, not a solution. It reveals emotional patterns, internal fears, and hidden insecurities that she may not be ready to acknowledge. The outward expression is loud, demanding, and explosive, but the internal cause is quiet, fragile, and deeply rooted in instability. Mature women respond with respect, clarity, and calm communication. This is one of the strongest indicators of emotional intelligence, self-respect, and inner stability. When a woman has done the inner work, when she has built her identity on something deeper than attention, validation, or constant reassurance, she doesn't collapse when the emotional climate shifts. She doesn't panic when you take space, nor does she lash out when things feel uncertain. Instead, she approaches the situation with grounded energy. She doesn't assume the worst, she doesn't dramatize the unknown, and she doesn't let insecurity drive her behavior. Her first instinct is not to attack, accuse, or manipulate. Her instinct is to understand. She values emotional safety for herself and for the relationship, so she communicates in a way that keeps the atmosphere calm rather than explosive. A mature woman can recognize that silence or distance can mean many things: stress, overwhelm, personal reflection, or simply the need for mental space. Instead of reacting impulsively, she pauses and thinks. She considers your emotional world, not just her own. This ability to balance her internal reactions with empathy is what separates emotional maturity from emotional instability. She might send a simple, respectful message. I noticed you're quieter than usual. If you need space, I respect that. If something is on your mind, I'm here when you're ready. This level of communication doesn't pressure you, doesn't guilt you, and doesn't question your intentions. It gives room for honesty without demanding it. It invites conversation without forcing it. It maintains dignity on both sides. Mature women are not threatened by temporary distance because they do not rely on constant attention to feel valuable. Their self-worth is internal, not dependent on your validation. They understand that a relationship is a connection between two independent people with their own emotions, responsibilities, and personal battles. Instead of interpreting everything emotionally, they process things logically and gracefully. If they feel uneasy, they communicate directly. If they feel confused, they ask questions instead of making assumptions. They value clarity more than emotional games. Their goal is to strengthen the relationship, not gain control over it. This calm response also reflects their ability to regulate their emotions. They don't let fear dictate their behavior. They don't let ego drive conversations. They don't let insecurity twist the narrative in their minds. A mature woman has learned to sit with her feelings before reacting, which is why her communication comes out balanced and thoughtful. She chooses words that are honest, but not harmful. She addresses issues without attacking your character. She expresses needs without demanding or manipulating. Her emotional expression is steady, not erratic. And perhaps the most defining trait is that a mature woman respects your autonomy. She doesn't feel entitled to your constant attention, nor does she punish you for needing personal space. She understands that healthy relationships breathe. They contract and expand. They have moments of closeness and moments of quiet. She doesn't cling during the quiet. She stays stable. She trusts the connection enough to let it flow naturally. She shows up in a way that feels safe, steady, and secure. Her communication becomes a reflection of her inner world, organized, peaceful, and rooted in emotional wisdom. Her reaction exposes whether she is emotionally dependent or emotionally intelligent. This single moment, how she responds to silence, distance, or a shift in attention, reveals layers of her internal world that she may try to hide in everyday conversations. Emotional dependency creates reactions driven by fear, anxiety, and insecurity, while emotional intelligence leads to responses rooted in understanding, self-respect, and balance. When a woman reacts to your withdrawal, she isn't just reacting to you, she is reacting to her own inner foundation. That foundation determines whether she clings or reflects, attacks or communicates, panics or pauses. Her behavior becomes a window into the emotional architecture she has built over the years. A woman who is emotionally dependent often cannot distinguish between genuine connection and emotional attachment. For her, your attention becomes a lifeline rather than a complement to her life. The moment she feels that lifeline slipping, her entire emotional state becomes unsettled. She may spiral into overthinking, worrying, and catastrophizing. Her messages may become rapid, anxious, or demanding. Her thoughts quickly jump to the worst-case scenario because she relies on your presence to feel stable. This dependency shows not only in her fear of losing you, but also in her need to constantly restore the sense of security your attention gave her. Her emotional world becomes reactive, chaotic, and unstable, and her responses reveal that she has not built enough internal resilience to hold herself steady. Emotionally dependent women may also react with guilt-tripping, neediness, or dramatic expressions that are meant to pull you back in. She might say things designed to provoke sympathy or responsibility, hoping to regain your attention by appealing to your emotions rather than communicating her own needs honestly. Instead of addressing the situation with clarity, she expresses her fears indirectly. Her reaction exposes a lack of boundaries within herself, a need for reassurance, and an emotional structure that crumbles when external validation is removed. This dependency isn't always intentional. It often stems from unhealed insecurities or past wounds. But the reaction still exposes where she truly stands emotionally. On the other hand, a woman who is emotionally intelligent approaches the same situation with an entirely different mindset. Instead of spiraling inward, she evaluates the situation calmly. She doesn't assume, blame, or cling. She understands that silence doesn't always mean rejection, and distance doesn't always mean disinterest. She recognizes that people have emotional rhythms, personal responsibilities, and mental states that may require space. Her reaction is measured because she has developed the internal tools to process discomfort without losing her sense of self. Emotional intelligence allows her to stay grounded even when things feel uncertain. An emotionally intelligent woman might acknowledge the shift and communicate in a composed, respectful way. She expresses how she feels without projecting negativity, and she leaves room for understanding rather than demanding immediate answers. She manages her emotions internally before responding externally. Her stability is not dependent on your attention. It comes from the relationship she has cultivated with herself. This is what makes her response calm, balanced, and clear. Her reaction reflects maturity, self-awareness, and emotional independence. Silence and distance are tools for clarity, not punishments or games. Many people misunderstand these actions, assuming they're meant to manipulate, provoke jealousy, or assert dominance. But when used by someone who values emotional stability, silence is never about winning, and distance is never about control. They are simply ways to step out of the noise long enough to hear the truth, your truth, her truth, and the truth of the relationship itself. Sometimes emotions, conversations, and routines get so entangled that clarity becomes impossible while you're still actively engaging. Silence creates space. Distance creates perspective. They allow you to observe what words and closeness often blur. When you pull back, you're not trying to punish someone. You're creating enough emotional breathing room to understand what's real, what's healthy, and what's sustainable. Silence is powerful because it removes the distractions that come from constant interaction. When you stop talking for a moment, the real dynamics surface. You begin to see whether the connection was fueled by genuine interest or emotional convenience. Distance helps you evaluate what has been overlooked while you were too close to see it clearly. Often, when you're deeply involved with someone, your vision gets clouded by affection, by habit, or by emotional dependency. Stepping away allows the emotional fog to lift. It gives you the ability to see patterns, behaviors, and truths that were previously hidden behind routine communication. Silence becomes a mirror for both people, showing what they feel, what they fear, and what they value when the noise stops. For her, your silence and distance reveal her emotional foundation. For you, they reveal your boundaries, desires, and limits. When you're constantly interacting, it's easy to lose touch with your own needs. Distance helps you reconnect with yourself. It allows you to recognize whether the relationship nurtures your emotional well-being or drains it. If being apart brings you peace instead of anxiety, that tells you something important about the dynamic. If silence helps you breathe instead of stressing you out, that's a signal you cannot ignore. Clarity often appears when emotional pressure disappears. Distance gives you that clarity, not through avoidance, but through observation. At the same time, silence exposes the motives and emotional maturity of the other person. A woman who respects herself and respects you will handle distance with grace and understanding. She won't assume the worst or jump to conclusions. She won't attack you or guilt you into responding. Instead, she will let things unfold naturally, trusting that communication will return when the moment is right. Her calmness reflects her stability, but a woman who becomes angry, manipulative, or panicked in your silence shows that she relied on your constant presence to maintain her emotional balance. Distance reveals her relationship with herself far more than her relationship with you. The way she handles your absence speaks louder than anything she says in your presence. Silence and distance are therefore not games. They are insight. They show who is capable of emotional maturity and who collapses under uncertainty. They highlight who communicates respectfully and who reacts impulsively. They reveal which connections are stable and which are built on shaky emotional ground. By stepping back, you're not trying to hurt anyone. You're trying to understand everything. Silence becomes a filter that separates what is meaningful from what is superficial. Distance becomes the space where truth finally has room to breathe.